In February 2020, a NASA-funded project at the University of Arizona's Lunar and Planetary Laboratory in Tucson announced that the Earth may have a second moon, and by some accounts, it may be ready to make another appearance. In December 2015, Elizabeth Doherty spoke with John Lear, the son of Bill Lear, about space, our moon, and what Mr. Lear believed are some very big lies that have been told to the American people. From the Doherty Report archives, here's Elizabeth.
Right now we're talking with John Lear and Jeremy Corbell. John Lear, of course, is the son of inventor Bill Lear, inventor of Lear jets, and Jeremy Corbell is an investigative filmmaker who just completed a film called Immaculate Deception, which features John Lear. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
The reason we wanted to talk with both of you is there have been some things we've read about Mr. Lear that indicate that he believes there is something on the other side of the moon that we are not aware of. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the moon has a population of about 250 million people. We're not supposed to know this, but most of NASA's efforts has been to hide this. They release photos every once in a while that are completely airbrushed, and they airbrush out all of the buildings and cities and towns and everything, but they're there, and the moon is supposed to have, according to NASA, 1/6 gravity of Earth. That's not true. It has 68% of the gravity of Earth and does have a breathable atmosphere. And daytime sky color is saffron yellow, and I get that from Howard Menger, who was taken to the moon in 1956 for 2 weeks and shown around and all the stuff that they have there, and then he became a consultant to the Pentagon.
Of course, I have lots of questions about this, and then I also want to talk about Immaculate Deception. The moon landing, the original moon landing, was that completely false?
Yeah, that was all fake. The faking was done by Stanley Kubrick, who did the faking at a studio in England, and then he kind of lived as a recluse until he passed away. He was scared that they were trying to get rid of everybody that knew that it was a fake. But no Apollo program ever went near the moon or orbited it or landed there. It would have been impossible with the 68% gravity of Earth. They wouldn't have had enough fuel.
So where did you get the information from about this?
I got this information starting in reading about back in the 1856 when a Danish astronomer made a proposal to the body of astronomers there in Paris. And he said that based on his information, there was probably life on the far side of the moon. He was debunked by Admiral Newcomb in 1870, who was the head of the observatory in Washington, the Naval Observatory in Washington, and not debunked anything on fact, but just the fact that he was an admiral. But in fact, there is life on the, it's not on the far side, it's on the near side. If you get any photos there's clear photos of towns and cities if you can get a hold of the photos. Now, the way I did it is I got a book called SP200 that's a NASA publication, and it's called The Moon as Viewed by the Lunar Orbiters, which went between 1965 and 1967. And there's lots of real nice photos of the far side there. All the photos that NASA's going to show you these days are those photos, but airbrushed, so that you can't see any of the cool stuff that's really there.
When we look at the moon, what are we seeing?
You're seeing the near side of the moon, and NASA always refers to the dark side of the moon. There is no dark side of the moon. All parts of the moon get the same amount of light, and if you look at the moon, there's a very bright spot about 10 o'clock as you're looking at the moon, and that's the crater Aristarchus. And if you get a picture of that and get it enlarged, you see a huge piece of machinery there glowing blue. And it's 23 miles in diameter. It's a wonderful picture. I had mine taken by a guy in England who used a 10-inch telescope. And there's all kinds of really good stuff. NASA took a picture of the north face of Copernicus, and that's very clear. Somehow, when I wrote one of the NASA companies that give those pictures out for them, I got sent a 15 by 20 inch negative, which I had enlarged, and there's just all kinds of stuff on the north face of Copernicus. It shows all kinds of digging, all kinds of, it has a huge machine that is helping doing the digging. It has houses, buildings, all kinds of stuff over there.
Yeah, you see the bucket wheel excavator.
Bucket wheel excavator, that's it.
Wow. So, Jeremy, you've made a film about this called Immaculate Deception. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's a little bit more than a film. It's kind of like an epic saga. There's going to be many pieces to it. I'm still currently in production and filming on it. We filmed about 99% of it, and I'm starting on the edit. But essentially, Immaculate Deception was my kind of childhood dream. John Lear is the godfather of conspiracy. He's polarizing. Everybody has a different, usually strong reaction to John and his ideas. And the important thing for me is that we need to dismantle each extraordinary belief that John has and look at it clearly and independently. John has reasons for what he believes, whether we agree with him or not. I don't agree with every single thing, but I do look at it, and it's surprising to me. John's come to his conclusions on his own terms, which is precisely what we must do as well as investigators. So basically, you have to decide for yourself what the nature of reality is. But Immaculate Deception is a window, and it's a porthole into John's life. He has lived an extraordinary life. He was a CIA pilot, and he comes from a very prominent aviation family. He had world speed records in the Lear jet. He was actually, he never tells anybody this, but he was the youngest person to ever climb the Matterhorn back when he did as a young lad. So essentially,
wow.
John has lived he's lived an extraordinary life, and people don't know these stories. And so the focus of Immaculate Deception is to show people what John believes, not what I believe, what John believes, and how he got to those conclusions and philosophies. It's kind of a confessional. I'm real excited to put it out to the world. Again, I'm still in production. My main film site is extraordinarybeliefs.com, but Immaculate Deception was the beginning of all of it, and that is the film on John Lear, and I'm so excited. My curiosity has been weaponized, and I'm sure other people's will be when they see the film footage.
Well, sure, because one of my first questions is, if you're looking through a telescope, could you not see what John's talking about?
It's interesting. I don't see a lot of what John sees. John's come to his conclusions on his own. Now, John has reasons. He can explain to you why, when you look through a telescope, you don't see what he's talking about. But, look, I'm going to leave that to John. I'm simply a filmmaker documenting a man, a pioneer, his extraordinary life. And that's my role. As far as what's on the moon, you're going to have to go to the expert on that, and that's John Lear.
Well, luckily we have him right here. So, John, what do you think? If I look through a telescope and I'm looking at the moon, why can't I see what you see?
Because the telescope isn't powerful enough. You need photos that were taken by NASA, the lunar orbiter, photos taken by a camera that was in orbit around the moon, and that's where you can see the real close-up stuff. There's a really good picture of a spaceport. It's in the crater Poincaré. It's on the far side of the moon. If you somehow get these books, but NASA has scooped them all up, but SP200 is a book of the pictures that were taken by lunar orbiter of the far side and the near side. They are very clear, and unfortunately, back then, NASA, or actually fortunately for us, they had no idea that 30 years from then, that the average citizen, the average public, would have computers that would be able to enlarge those pictures and see the really cool stuff is there. Now they've started to re-airbrush all of those pictures, and it's very difficult to get ones that show what I've seen. I think the ones that are still out there, taken by the Russians, if you look at Zond 7, that's ZOND 7, you'll see a lot of interesting stuff there as far as something that was built by other than man.
In case you're just joining us, we're talking with John Lear, son of Bill Lear, the inventor of Lear jets. Now, when I was growing up, people said, well, you can't see the other side of the moon. That never made sense to me.
Well, it's in rotational lock, which means that one side always faces us. Now, the moon is a gigantic spaceship. It's been there for 15,000 years. It was made actually 38 billion years ago inside Jupiter. And just as a information information here. NASA tells us there's 9 planets in our solar system. There's actually 40. And all of those planets have civilizations, anywhere from 5 to 7 complete different civilizations, as does Earth. We have our civilization on the surface, and we have hundreds of different civilizations below the surface. They come out every once in a while. You can see them, but they don't like us, and only NASA knows where the entrances are to that inner Earth. There's some in Antarctica and some at the North Pole.
So Eisenhower really got us started on our space program. Do you think he was aware of all this information?
No, I don't think so. He was contacted in 1954 by one of the ETs that were watching us develop, and they met with him and wanted to give him some weapons, and he decided not to. That meeting was held again with somebody else in 1963, and apparently we did accept then. The facts are that we did go to the moon in 1962, we went to Mars in 1968, and we've had presence on both of those planets since then. We've tried to, the reason they held the Apollo program, the reason it was fake is they just needed the money to do some other projects they needed. So they faked the Apollo missions with Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and Mike Collins and all the rest of them that allegedly went up there. But as I say, those were faked by Stanley Kubrick, who did the faking in England.
Well, you know, Buzz Aldrin gets really upset when people say this. I have heard that publicly he made almost threats to people that say that he didn't go to the moon.
Right. The mind control that was developed from the Nazis that came over in 1948 and 49 through Operation Paperclip have done a real good job with the mind control. And those astronauts really believe that they went to the moon. There's no problem in that. But if you read Buzz Aldrin's book, every time he tries to talk about the actual landing on the moon, he vomits because there's something in his mind that won't let him talk about it. And there's a mix-up there somehow, and he gets very sick. All you have to do is read his book and see how he talks about that. Yes, he does get upset because he's sure that he's been there.
Wow, that's really odd. So why do you think the government has decided now is the time to show us some of these pictures of the moon that you say are likely not real?
They're all airbrushed. They're trying to reinforce the idea that the moon doesn't have any air, that nothing is there, that it's just plaster of Paris and all the other nonsense that the astronauts told us when they were allegedly circling the moon. But the fact is, there's a civilization there. They come every once in a while and pick up different scientists and engineers, take them up there and show them around. But it's not for everybody to know. Now, why it's not for everybody to know, I really don't know what the plan is.
Well, when you look at the moon, one would think you'd be able to see some kind of atmosphere. But when we look at the moon, we see absolutely nothing. It's just like this ball in the sky. Do you think that that's a real picture of what we see?
The atmosphere is very, very thin on the moon. It's probably only about 5 or 6 miles thick. It's nothing that you could see when it was passed outside of another object. And like I say, it has a breathable atmosphere, but it's on the surface of the moon. It's like if you were on the Earth at 18,000 feet. Is there now? They've all become accustomed, of course, living there for hundreds and thousands of years, to breathing at 18,000 feet. But when we go there, we have to circle the moon several times to get our bodies used to the breathing at that level of atmosphere. And then we can go down and we don't have any problem breathing on the surface of the moon. That's the same thing that Howard Menger found out when he went in 1956.
What is gravity like there?
Gravity, as I say, is 68% of that of Earth's. It can hold an atmosphere in, and that's what NASA doesn't want you to believe. They want you to believe that there's no atmosphere there, that nothing can grow there, and that's their idea.
Do you think that they see Earth as sort of disposable because of all these other places?
Well, we were made by a certain group of ETs. They're the ones that engineered us, invented us, and put us on this planet, like they've done with billions of other planets. Our universe is infinite. There is no end. There was no Big Bang. There will be no end. It's enormous, and there's hundreds of billions of ETs out there. and we just see about 80 or 90 of them around the Earth. The government has in contact up at the Area 51 with 5 or 6 of them, which work at that base with our humans.
Jeremy Corbell is also with us. You're releasing Immaculate Deception?
Yeah, at the 2015 International UFO Congress, I'm one of the keynote speakers on Saturday, and I'm going to be releasing in my presentation a series of my investigations, starting with and primarily focusing on John Lear and how knowing John has opened a lot of doors to me. And essentially, I'm going to be releasing the trailer, or the teaser trailer, for Immaculate Deception for the first time for the world to see at that event. It will then be available online. People can view it on their own at ImmaculateDeception.com.
What do you think is going to be covered at this conference in addition to this information?
Well, this conference is going to be extraordinary. And the reason it is because Bob Lazar will be speaking at this conference. Now, he's kind of kept quiet for the last 25 years. And as you remember, the Lazar story broke because of my mentor, George Knapp. He's the one that broke the story. Now, how did George Knapp break the story? Well, all roads lead from the godfather of conspiracy, John Lear. John was the one who introduced Bob to George. And so at this conference, Bob will be talking again with George on stage. It's right before my presentation. And I think at this conference, you're going to see and experience a lot of new information, but also it's going to drive home the fact that we are not alone, that we have been visited, and that there's been a constant program of visitation throughout, the thousands of years here with humanity. And, you're going to see evidence of that at this conference. Now, it's debatable, right? None of us have more information than the other, really. But what we're going to experience is people who have worked on the inside, like Bob Lazar.
Mr. Lear, are you working on any other research projects?
Most stuff that I've been talking about can be seen on my website, thelivingmoon.com. That's THE livingmoon.com. And also there's a website called Connect with John Lear if somebody wants to talk to me personally.
Well, we thank you both so much for joining us. We want to get an update when this documentary comes out, Immaculate Deception, so I hope you'll get back with us.
Absolutely, I will.
Thank you. We've been talking with Jeremy Corbell, investigative filmmaker, and John Lear, son of Bill Lear, inventor of Lear Jets. Thank you so much for joining us.
Our pleasure.